Hi, everyone. We're just gonna wait until we've reached a little bit of a critical mass here before we get started, so just give us a couple of minutes. All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to most. Good evening to any that are joining us from other parts of the world. Thank you and welcome to today's webinar. Up in Smoke, Centuries of Targeting of the Black Community is a webinar that came together for a number of reasons. And I want to start off by situating us in the history of the moment that we're in right now. Just a couple of weeks ago, we mourned the 1 year since the murder of George Floyd. We're about to enter a summer where it's the 1 year anniversary of the uprisings that took place, catalyzed by Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd's deaths. And as we're seeing right now, and as we saw last year, the co-optation of the movement for Black Lives because of its saliency across the nation is nothing new. It is happening at a massive scale, and included in that co-optation is the tobacco corporations that have driven the deaths of more than 45,000 Black people every single year here in the US. So before co-opting the Black Lives Matter movement, before co-opting the LGBTQ movement with rainbow flags, before co-opting the suffragette movement in the early 1900s with freedom torches and marketing directly to women's liberation groups, the tobacco industry has been marketing, co-opting, targeting, exploiting, and killing Black people in a number of ways. The tactics are endless, the movements are abundant, and the realities are magnified in this moment. We have a lot of history and understanding to reflect on, but even more than that, we have a modern reincarnation of the tobacco industry as an ally to Black movements for liberation. This is not a reality that's rooted in any history. This is not a reality that we should be reliant on. And today we're going to hear from some great leaders in the movement, not only for ensuring that Black Lives Matter, but also that public health is viewed through the lens of racial equity and making sure that we're taking care of all Black people, not just dividing the deaths based on the source of the violence that exists. So today we've got Phillip Gardiner and Tracy Brown from AATCLC. We've got Sterling Fulton from the Center for Black Health and Equity. And hopefully pretty soon we'll be joined by Akili, who is staff at Corporate Accountability and also is a board member of Institute for the Black World. And all of these brilliant folks I want to thank before we even start. And I want to open it up for Dr. Gardiner to set the scene and really remind us of what's at stake here. So Dr. Gardiner, take it away.
Thank you, Michél, and good afternoon, all. I just want to reemphasize some of the things that were said, and I'm going to do that through a very short slide presentation. I'm going to share my screen with you. Let's see if I can get it up to, there we go. So I'm going to talk to you about getting menthol and all flavored tobacco products off the market now. My colleagues who follow me are going to give you the backstory. I'm going to essentially tell you the front story. And I would like to start us off with this, that This is a new framework for our time, that menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars have been and are the main vectors of death and disease in Black, brown, and other poor and marginalized communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has just thrown a spotlight on the health disparities and unequal treatment that these communities have faced for hundreds of years in the United States. At this time, nothing could be more helpful in saving Black lives and showing that Black lives matter than getting menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars straight out of the Black community. That's the take-home message for what I'm about to present. So we want menthols removed from the marketplace because Black lives matter. As already mentioned, it's estimated that some 45,000 African Americans die each year from tobacco-related diseases, and Blacks die disproportionately from tobacco-related diseases, especially lung cancer, heart attacks, and cerebrovascular disease or stroke. I'm going to talk to you as quickly as I can about the African Americanization of menthol cigarettes, 60 years of predatory marketing and counting. If you take anything away from the presentation today, take this slide away, that in 1952-53, only 5% of African Americans smoked menthol cigarettes. By 1968, that had almost tripled to 14%. By 1976, it had tripled again to 44%. By the mid-2000s, above 82%. Today, 85% of African American adults and 93% of African American youth smoke menthol cigarettes. Where in the hell did this come from? I'm going to argue that the tobacco industry assault on the Black community started back in the 1960s. They began to use male actors with more Black features. They began to do more advertising on TV because they knew it resonated more with African Americans. Tripled cigarette advertising in ebony. They began to use our idiom. Menthol's got a brand new bag, like James Brown's bag, new bag. The cool jazz, cool lexicon, cool jazz festival. And unfortunately still today, many groups in the African American community take money from the tobacco industry. They either want to buy our silence or want us to play along with what they've been doing this whole time. This is an ad for Salem, a menthol cigarette in 1958. Couple, white couple in the meadow, Salem refreshes your taste. By 1963, we're looking at Black actors selling cigarettes. This is Elston Howard, catcher for the New York Yankees. Got to remember, this is 1963. This March on Washington is going on. The Birmingham church is being bombed, but the tobacco industry are putting Black folks front and center on national television and in national magazines with these ads. This is not a mistake. The tobacco industry has been far ahead of the game. This is the early 70s. Brother with a dashiki beads and an afro. Who do you think they're aiming that at? This is the mid-1970s. Brothers playing basketball, whether they have suit and tie on or in tennis shoes. This is the late 80s. Everybody's in the game now. Winston's in it, real and rich and cool. By the 1980s, the fight breaks out for market share around menthol cigarettes aimed at the Black folks. Great article by my colleague, Dr. Valerie Yerger. They went to places, they knew where the high traffic areas were. They knew where the parks where Black folks hang out, known street corners. They knew the daily routes, and they would give away free cigarette samples, blaring music from their vans. This is the early 90s. Newport Pleasure, fired up again using our idiom. This is the early 2000s. Enticing, see the reflection in the background, the image in the background to make it enticing. The Cool Mix Festival, the DJ battle is on. You think this is aimed at a particular group of people? You think. Let's just go through some of the facts. As I mentioned before, 85% of African American adult smokers and 94% of African American youth smokers smoke menthol cigarettes. There's more advertising, more promotions, and most disturbing, menthol cigarettes are cheaper in the Black community. We actually have data on this. Menthol is an anesthetic that masks the harsh taste of tobacco. Numbing and cooling properties allow the poison to go down easier. That's why they put it in there. Most people don't know that the darker your skin, the more nicotine is stored in your body. What we call melanin, great article by Gary King and friends. Menthol slows down the metabolism of nicotine, cotinine in the liver, thus menthol stays in the system longer. It slows it down. Menthol slows down the metabolism of nicotine, we say /cotinine. Menthol has greater cell permeability, meaning menthol cigarette smoke penetrates cell wall much more efficiently than non-menthol cigarette smoke. Another big set of words, independent sensory activation of neurotransmitters, means that menthol cigarettes are more addicting than regular cigarettes. And increases salivary flow, transbuccal drug absorption, another group of big words, mean if you chew tobacco that has menthol in it, it crosses the gum barrier much more efficiently. The original sin that we're going to talk some about at the end of my presentation right now is the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act of 2019, where 13 flavors were removed from cigarettes except for menthol. Today, over 200 local jurisdictions restrict the sale of flavors, 65 of them restricting menthol, and 2 states, Massachusetts and California, have prohibited the sale of menthol and all flavored tobacco products. We all see the asterisk by California because we know the tobacco industry spent some $12 million in a 2.5-month period to collect 600,000 signatures to block the law from going into effect and making it a referendum for next year's November election. Today, and I'm going to say this way, menthol was a sacrificial lamb. I can't say that strong enough. I use the slide of all of that. If menthol was a sacrificial lamb, then a number of things were gone. I'm suggesting to you that the deal with the devil was the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. The deal was cut with Philip Morris, Southern senators, and some representatives of the tobacco control movement. It excluded menthol while it got rid of 13 other flavors. What that means is that African Americans, women, youth, Native Hawaiians, Filipinos, folks from the LGBTQ community, Puerto Ricanos, folks with behavioral health issues, all got thrown under the bus, period. Citizens Petition was developed in 2013. What's interesting, since we were one of the signatories for that, it has been, we argued it had been 18 months since the report stated that the removal of menthol from the marketplace would be beneficial to the public's health. We were pissed after 18 months. It's been now, it's 2021. A number of all of the leading tobacco groups signed on to the petition. And then earlier last year, and actually in November of last year, the FDA was unable to dismiss the lawsuit against it. So they said they would respond to the citizens petition on January of 2021. Of course, they responded on April 29th. The suit was brought by the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, Action on Smoking and Health, and later joined by the American Medical Association and National Medical Association. The FDA finally acted on April 29th. Remember, this has been going on. Negotiations were in 2008. The law was passed in 2009. And here we are in 2021, over a decade later, that the FDA finally decides to take a step and pass a rule, start the rulemaking process. I want to make it as clear as possible to everybody who's listening. Menthol and flavors have not been banned. They have just started the rulemaking process. The good, of course, it admits that menthol should have been removed from the marketplace much earlier. It includes rulemaking around flavored little cigars, which is a big step forward. And it also mentions the importance of getting other federal agencies involved in cessation. The bad, of course, it's still 1 year before even we will see the rule that is being put forward. We're actually working to fight against that. Amendments and challenges will take years to go on once the rule itself has come out. And the ugly, of course, is the tobacco industry, and the tobacco industry will sue probably more than once, and more years and lives will be lost. Let's be clear where we are. We can't wait on the FDA. We must continue the fight at the local and state levels to ban menthol. The longer we wait, the more teens will be addicted and the more lives will be lost. Just to repeat, remember that 45,000 Black folks die each year from tobacco-related diseases. The take-home message is this, is that menthol is a social justice issue. The disproportionate marketing and targeting of candy-flavored poisons to African Americans and other specially oppressed sectors of our society is outright discriminatory and genocidal. We're talking about the poorest, folks with least informed, folks with the fewest resources. Indeed, it's the definition of the most vulnerable, preying on the most vulnerable sections of our society. It's estimated that if only 30% of the people quit if menthol were banned, if only 30% of the people would stop, over 500,000 lives would be saved. Over 250,000 of them would be Black folks. What's at stake? It's our future. It's the perfect picture, and I've used it for dozens of years now. Here's a young Black man surrounded by tobacco imagery and tobacco signage. With that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to thank you all for listening. Again, I'm one of the co-chairs of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. This is my email, and this is how we can be reached. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This is the front story. What you're about to hear now is the back story.
Thanks so much, Dr. Gardiner. What an incredible way to get us all up to speed. We're sharing the same level of understanding right now. And I'm going to kick it right over to Sterling Fulton to share a little bit more about the deep history, the centuries of legacy of impact of the tobacco industry. Sterling, take it away.
Yes, hi everyone. Hi, my name is Sterling Fulton, and I'm the Evaluation Director for the Center for Black Health and Equity. Dr. Phil did a wonderful job in terms of setting the stage, and I'm hoping that at the end of my talk that you'll understand that 61% of the time that African Americans have been here, how we got to America, how that young man got to sitting there with those menthol signs around him. I'm going to talk about those first 246 years that African Americans, how we got here. And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tracy Brown, from AATCLC, who's going to take us through Jim Crow in modern day. So I want to first get started with setting the groundwork to actually what is tobacco. Okay, so we talk about cigarettes, we talk about pipe tobacco, we talk about tobacco, but what actually is it? And tobacco is a plant. It comes from Nicotiana tabacum. It is used ceremonially. It has been used ceremonially for the last 6,000 years in Native American populations. Tobacco was used to promote physical, spiritual, emotional, and community well-being in indigenous communities. It is a part of the nightshade family, like peppers and tomatoes, and it's been grown in South America, like I said, for the past 6,000 years. So the question is, how did a plant that was considered sacred by our Native American brothers and sisters and used for spiritual purposes end up being co-opted and being used to enslave tens of millions of people and create and sustain an industry that is responsible for almost 500,000 deaths a year? I'm going to walk us through the first part of that story. So it all started with peer pressure. So sometimes back in 1580, Sir Walter Raleigh, and actually I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, we're named after him. He began smoking pipe smoke, and it helped to spark this fad. And this is actually the picture. It's a little grainy, but that is from a bill in which actually shows this. This was a currency. It's not an American currency, but it's a currency. And it shows Walter Raleigh with his pipe tobacco with his friends. And people wanted to become very popular in the Elizabethan court. And what they did was they took up the habit. Well, smoking quickly became an expensive habit, and Europeans became addicted. So, and tobacco it's a challenging crop to grow. Okay, it's not easy to grow. So back here in the colonies, we took us over into Europe, but back here in the colonies, tobacco is a crop that has to be rotated. I mean, it drenches, it takes the nutrients out of the soil. It's really labor intensive. So the initial people here were indentured servants who came to the United States. And this is before 1619. They were indentured servants. Well, indentured servants, they weren't keeping up, and so they needed to the people, the landowners needed a source of people to help that they didn't have to pay. And so what they decided to do was they started looking for people that they could bring over to the colonies and not pay fair wages. So what happened was Africans were forcibly brought to the colonies under English rule, and but they were freed at that after a certain period of time. So around about 1619, those first 23 Africans who got off of that off those ships were considered indentured servants. They too were given lands, they were given animals and other supplies to start their lives, and many of them actually became very involved within the society at that time. So the enslaved were not necessarily a permanent lifetime status. It became a permanent lifetime status around about actually we were just talking about this before, around about 1640. There was a gentleman named John Punch. You can look him up, Punch with the P. He was considered the first slave that was considered chattel slave, slavery. But that notion of enslavement changed throughout the 1600s. So I'm kind of giving you the conditions of why slavery happened here in the United States. So here's the question: why Africans? Why were Africans picked? Well, Africans were chosen for a number of reasons. I like to show this picture because, growing up, many of us were taught that Africa was backwards. And it could not be further from the truth. Actually, Europe and Europeans, they were familiar with Africa. They knew about its immense resources. Many Europeans, actually people from China and India and the Middle East, had been trading with Africa for centuries. Well, Africa, like I said, it had been known for its rich resources. The continents and its inhabitants were recognized for being technologically advanced, for its methods of agriculture and craftsmanship. And actually, I like to show this picture. This picture is actually an example of metalwork from eastern Nigeria around about the 9th century. And we don't ever get to see pictures like this coming from Africa. African rulers had established trade routes, in the Mediterranean world, and like I said, out of China. They've actually found shards of Chinese pottery in Great Zimbabwe. Um, so Africans were chosen because they were a ready-made and skilled workforce. Okay, so if you ever want to win a prize, like for a trivia contest, um, guess which country has the most pyramids? I just like to say this. It's not Egypt. Actually, the country in the world with the most pyramids is Sudan. Sudan actually has between 200 and 255 pyramids as compared to Egypt's 138. And they were actually created by people who were considered by the Kingdom of Kush, which is an African country, which was considered an African country. Okay, so that kind of sets the stage of what Africa was like. You had people who were part of the workforce. You had labor to happen that needed to be happening in Americas, and then you had addicted people in Europe. All of this kind of sets the stage for a triangle. So, and that set the stage for the transatlantic slave trade. I'm going to show you a film that really, it's just 2 minutes or 3 minutes. It's very quick, but it kind of gives you an idea of how people were transported from Africa over to the Americas. Oops, okay, hold on.
The thing that distinguishes slavery in Africa from Atlantic slavery is race. Europeans set in motion a system of slavery that was predicated on the idea that certain people were marked as enslavable. We've learned a great deal about the Middle Passage in the last 40 years or so. The volume of the trade involved the removal of about 12.5 million people from the African continent. The Middle Passage was the middle leg of a voyage that starts in Europe. The first passage is from Europe to Africa. The Middle Passage is the journey from Africa to America. And then the third passage is the journey back from America to Europe.
The Middle Passage could take anywhere from 2 to 3 months. Men and women were separated. Men typically were held in the lower belly of the ship. The roof, if you would, was quite low, probably about 4 feet high. So people couldn't stand. African men were shackled together, and they were packed so closely together in a spoon-like position. And they would stay like that for pretty much the entire journey.
You're talking about hundreds of people. You're at 120 degrees. It smells terrible. There are actually people dying around you, which has to be a traumatic experience for everybody on board.
Maybe 10% of voyages, we know there was some attempt to rise up, to kill the crew, to try to turn the boat around, to change their destinies. Historians have a hard time capturing what the Middle Passage must have felt like for enslaved men and women. It's a voyage that is deeply disorienting. It's a voyage to a place that you can't anticipate. You don't know what's going to happen to you. I don't think we have adequate words to capture that experience.
I know this ain't home, but it's where you gotta be. It's time your family paid from top.
The thing that
Okay, so with setting the stage for this, it's really important to kind of keep in mind that in the beginning, round about 1619, about 20,000 pounds of tobacco was being shipped over to Europe for consumption. Which sets the stage for all of this, for the Middle Passage. Less than 50 years later, we're talking about 1.5 million pounds of tobacco being sent. Now, that's just tobacco. That's not including the other types of, rum or cotton or other types of commodity that was used. This triangle trade system from the Middle Passage, what's important to understand, it was an industry. It was the tobacco and the tobacco companies that were processing the tobacco for people to consume. They were purchasing raw tobacco. They were also adding to this. There were bankers who loaned money. There was insurance companies who were insuring slaves and slave commodities. Slaves were actually used as form of as backing loans for the expansion of not only plantations, but also the purchasing of ships. You had African chieftains who benefited from receiving arms and money. I mean, this was an economy. And so what brought this on? Well, of course, we know greed, but also something happened around about this same time. And there was an uprising in Virginia amongst Virginia's white and African indentured servants. Actually, the African and indentured servants and the white servants joined together, and they were led by a landowner who was a colonist. His name was Nathaniel Bacon, and he rose up against the rule of the governor at the time. And this so threatened and so scared the people that were in power. What they decided to do was to pass a series of laws that would actually prevent this from ever happening again. And what they did was they codified race into the laws. And historians believe that this key factor accelerated the hardening of racial lines, and that was associated into slavery. This is around about the first time in which you start seeing people being classified as a color within the law. Actually, within the dictionary, the first time an adjective like white is used to refer to a white man was in the Oxford English Dictionary, and that happened about the same time Bacon's Rebellion did, around about this same time. So there was also pseudoscience that happened as a result of this. All of this proved to be a very useful tool. This race and racism led to a social concept of racial superiority and inferiority. All of the things that are setting the groundwork for what Tracy's going to talk about a little later on, about how and why the images of Africans were used, and how come that was so appealing to so many people. I also want to point out here, like I said, the concept of racism and racial superiority and inferiority that was used, that allowed the profitability of tobacco companies, of big tobacco companies, to happen and to keep happening. This is an image of the first tobacco factory, which is in Seville, Spain, which was established around about this same time. And actually, Lorillard happened. Lorillard, who was the first American tobacco company, actually happened around about this same time too, in 1757, I believe. So. But I wanted to kind of set this stage so that you could see the insidiousness of how this crop that produced a plant that was addictive to people was used as the backing of human suffering. Okay, so we're going to run quite through here. I'm going to just run us through, because I'm running out of time here, through couple of 100 years until emancipation, and when Africans were freed. Well, what was interesting at that time, in which happened through Reconstruction, and at the time, people still needed to have their crops grown, and labor was still an issue. So in order to keep farmers, in order to keep the agriculture cheap, one of the things that happened, that there were separate but equal laws that happened to keep people in a second-class citizenship, to keep people as second-class citizens. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy, who's going to take it from here and talk about Jim Crow, and how Jim Crowism was used by tobacco companies, or how images that were used during Jim Crowism was used by tobacco companies to sell the product.
Thank you, Sterling. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here today. I want to start by introducing myself briefly. Again, my name is Tracy Brown, and I am the project manager for the AATCLC. I'm also a visual artist. That is my true identity. I'm a visual artist. I have been my whole life. And I'm also an independent curator, and I curated an exhibition called Same Game, Different Smokers. But today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the visual culture of associated with the tobacco industry, and the role that art plays in the tobacco industry. So I started with this first slide, and I titled it "Use as Directed," right? That's a term that is often utilized as a cautionary term, to help us know that we need to use a product only as we are told to use it. The interesting thing about tobacco is that when used as directed, it'll more than likely kill you. It's one of the few products out there that's essentially the makers know is going to kill their customers. Most nicotine products do not come with instructions. Most nicotine products used in advertising and print and films have been key training tools for the tobacco industry, right? So historical evidence says that the tobacco industry files discovered as a result of various lawsuits trace how the tobacco industry collaborated over time with the U.S. film industry and the print industry to push smoking and promote brands. So you don't see most tobacco products, you don't see place cigarette in mouth, light end of cigarette. They teach you how to smoke and how to use their products by promoting the ideas of not only how to utilize them, but how to relate to them. So imagery in the tobacco industry or pushed by the tobacco industry is laden with propaganda that sparks mental associations between tobacco products and health, glamour, prosperity, and just us living our best lives. But also very importantly, with white supremacy, white benevolence, and revisionist history about the pleasantries of slavery, because those did not exist. So all these things are counter to the stark data that is reported, and stark data and true actual reality. So it said that cigarettes are amongst the most marketed products in the history of marketing. And of course, we see these massive rates of death from this deadly product, this poisonous product that is marketed has been marketed for more than a century to make people believe that they are not half as deadly as they truly are. Now, people have known for a long time that smoking is a health hazard, and people have spoken out against it. Now, I have zero good things to say about King James of England. Let's just be very clear. But what he did do is he wrote a document called A Counterblast to Tobacco in 1640, and he called tobacco a loathsome, a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, and dangerous to the lungs. So these people knew that smoking and tobacco was bad. Folks have been speaking out against it for a long time. They're also created products to help people stop smoking. This is an ad from the 1900s for no tobacco to help people stop utilizing tobacco products. Now, I want to insert something very important here, because when we talk about tobacco industry advertising, and targeting the Black community, it's more than just advertising. As Sterling pointed out, the tobacco industry is inextricably linked to the chattel slavery industry. It was a huge industry in this country, and it is also connected to the problematic history of the start of policing in this country. So these are some slave patrol regulations that existed for what people call the patty rollers, or the folks who chased down enslaved humans when they would either, escape the plantations or the places where they were working, but also people who were they may have been enslaved and running errands. I want to bring your particular attention to two items. One, it says that the patty roller shall have the power to inflict corporal punishment if two present decide that they want that's what they want to do. If two be present, agreeing thereto. So if two of them are there to decide they want to brutalize a Black person, they were well in their rights to do that. And also, one patroller shall have power to seize any Negro slave who behaves insolently to a patroller or otherwise unlawfully or suspiciously, and hold such slave in custody until he can bring together a requisite number of patrollers to act in the business. That's all Barbecue Becky right there. The calling the police on Black people it's all connected to that same history of white people policing the Black body and Black people, and modern policing supporting that. And I'm not talking about all white humans. I'm talking about folks who have white supremacy so ingrained in their psyche that they can't function. And many of them are police officers. Not all police officers, but many of them are. So we can't pretend like those origins don't exist. When in the early ads, Black people, in early ads in general, but especially in tobacco ads, Black people were portrayed as lazy and irresponsible, childish and ignorant. Africans from the continent were portrayed as savages, as well as a threat. these ads mutilated our features and exaggerated our facial features, and they also mocked our vernacular, as you see here, where this quote says, "My, it sure am tasting." We don't talk like that. This is a misrepresentation of Black vernacular, which is actually something that people try to mimic all the time. Anytime somebody wants to sound cool, they do whatever they can to mimic us. So they did so to promote the dispossession of Black people's recently hard-won rights. Anytime we gained rights around anything, these ads were there to try to prove, and the media was there to try to prove that we were savages and we didn't deserve those rights, whether it was ads, media, science, etc. And the tobacco industry participated in that. All of these things, these ideas, the happy slave, the threatening savage, all this is grounded in white supremacy, and these images were widely distributed by the tobacco industry for many, many years, and they helped people to justify atrocities perpetrated against Black people, whether it was slavery or whether it was general daily terrorism, Jim Crow, social disenfranchisement, whatever it is. Because we were promoted to be savages, it was easy to justify terrible behavior towards us. Now, there were a number of products that had terrible names, like nigger hair. This was a real product, nigger hair tobacco, coonskin cigars, and also there was a whole series of collector cards that talked about the savage chiefs and rulers, and they listed all these different chiefs and all these different community, spiritual, religious rulers from cultures all over the planet, and portrayed them as savages, and people read about them, and it was an adventure for them, right? But when you think about nigger hair tobacco and coonskin cigars, this is sort of talking about removal of pieces of the Black body and consumption of those pieces by the populace. So, also at the time, which was one of the things that was very popular, was lynching Black people. And what did they do after a lynching? They would cut off pieces of the burned, charred, mutilated body and keep them as souvenirs. We cannot pretend that these ads that are put out by the tobacco industry, that their role in supporting chattel slavery to bring about the growth of their industry, and that any of their words is divorced from the reality of what Black people were facing. Now, this is a image of a person who has been lynched at a social lynching. They were social events, and this is a postcard that somebody purchased to send to another person to say, hey, look at what we did. This is the type of brutality that the tobacco industry has contributed towards happening towards Black people for many years. It's problematic, it's real, and it needs to be called out. So people who say the tobacco industry has been targeting the Black community for the past 50 years, that's incorrect. They have been targeting us for hundreds of years, literally hundreds. Also, this epic saga against the savages. There was this promotion of this idea of, white supremacy and the dashing, daring, brave white person, and the benevolence, the invincibility of the white man against Black savagery. These images are promoted in these products and then widely distributed. You might have it either on the package, or you have these images that are sent to stores to promote the various products and tell people to encourage people to buy them. And they also did things like devaluing our hairstyles and our adornment and ways of being. You might go to ancient classical areas or parts of ancient African antiquity, and you see people who adorn themselves with natural things, with leaves, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful. It had meaning, it's symbolism, and it's richness. But what happened here is, because these images were promoted as savagery, then all of a sudden white folks are looking at these and saying, oh yeah, look at the savages, this is true, and it makes me feel better about myself. But what happens? Black people also see these images and they're like, I'm not a savage, I'm not associated with Africa. So these images also sold self-hatred. It did not just advertise products. It also advertised the hatred of oneself. And that makes it even easier also to perpetrate atrocities, and also, promote self-destructive behavior. So now let's move on to 1927, 1929, we still have the sort of pervasive circulation of these images with, you know, the nigger hair tobacco. This is a calendar, right, that people would get as a promotional item. Also, the minstrelsy with this person in blackface selling old gold cigarettes. You also, around the same time, Lloyd Spud Webb discovers menthol cigarettes. He had some cigarettes. He left them in a canister of menthol crystals. I guess he was doing some breathing treatments, and took them out, smoked his cigarettes, and found them to be minty fresh. And the menthol cigarettes were born. So they're the first widely sold menthol cigarette in America. And Brown and Williamson launched Kool as a brand in 1932 because they were impressed by Lloyd Spud Webb's success. So Lloyd Spud Webb. Lloyd Spud Hughes' success. So Kool was marketed to upscale customers. They had a penguin who was supposed to essentially be in a tuxedo with a cigarette and a top hat, right? But it was for upscale whites. This is the origins of menthol, not the black cigarette, but in actuality, a menthol cigarette that was marketed to upscale whites. But menthol cigarettes really took off in 1956 when R.J. Reynolds, and yes, I said R.J. Reynolds, the same ones that are causing mischief in all over the country, all over the world, they introduced Salem cigarettes with the first filter-tipped menthol cigarettes. So thanks a lot, Spud. You caused us a lot of problems, right? So these are what early menthol ads looked like. So now, let's talk a little bit about the origins of marketing to the Black community. Over time, images shifted, or it was discovered that the Black community is a market segment, right? So then folks were realizing, boy, Black people have money. Let's take a look at a video that was actually created by Johnson Publishing, and it's called The Secret to Selling the Negro, which is we're not even going to talk about the problematic multi-layered reality of that name, but The Secret to Selling the Negro. Let's take a look. Actually, give me just a second. I want to share my sound. All right. Right, so that very dramatic opening is where they get this thing. I guess is the world's first email. Can you imagine if every time you got an email it did that? We'd all be nerve-wracked and oh my goodness. Anyway, it said the average Negro wage earner today gets 4 times more money than a few years ago, according to the Secretary of Commerce of the U.S. So the income, the Negroes' income increased more rapidly than the income of all other Americans. So all of a sudden, the tobacco industry was like, wait a minute now. These are people that we can sell a lot of things to. And so let's look a little bit at, take a look at another portion where it is described, the Black community is described as a market segment.
Hello, I'm Bob Trout. I've got a story here that I think is big, really big, because it's bound to have a terrific impact on business. I'm talking about a new market, a big new market, millions upon millions of new prospects with $15 billion to spend. That's right, I said 15 billion. That's a lot of money, isn't it? The surprising thing is that it's a fresh market, still full of opportunities. It grew up so fast, got so big in a hurry, that few of us realize its scope. Now these days, nobody's likely to pass up chances to sell. And yet right here in our own front yard, there's a neglected market. There's money waiting to be spent. To get the story of this market, to be able to tell you the secret of selling the Negro, we did a lot of digging. We talked to leading businessmen, to customers, and to salesmen. We went to Washington, D.C. We set up cameras and other key points around the nation. And out of this all, there emerged a story, the story of a new market.
So the important thing to note is that folks were very well aware of how much money was available in the Black community.
Hello, I'm Bob Trout.
Uh-oh. How much money was available in the Black community? So now you see a shift to very positive imagery. You see imagery that uses prominent figures, whether they're famous people or someone who's a chief of police. You might not know this guy, but you just see that he's a person of authority. And instead of the coon type image, you see these advertisements that say things like the man who thinks for himself. So now you have the people who are starving for positive imagery of themselves, absolutely inhaling these images. They're beautiful images and they say positive things about Black people. You just weren't seeing that. The challenge is that the images are wrapped in these terrible products, these poisonous, deadly products are being wrapped in these images so that your mind associates one with the other. When we we also saw the emergence of menthol marketing towards Black people, right? So it rears its ugly head, and many of our own publications are the ones that were saturated with these images. So around this time as well is the birth of the Johnson Publishing Company, and they had publications like Jet and Ebony and Tan and Hue, all these color related images. But basically, throughout the multiple decades, these publications were replete with images from alcohol and tobacco, namely the tobacco industry. And the Johnson Publishing Company, definitely welcomed those images, which was problematic. But yeah, they really, the tobacco industry dedicated a significant amount of its resources, or significant amount of resources towards advertising in these magazines. And they did so because they wanted to utilize them in a very divisive manner. So we have to think about what Jet and Ebony, et cetera, meant to the community. They were trusted sources of information. You showed very opulent styles of beauty queens, et cetera. So we fantasized about living rooms that looks a lot like the one you see here. But in actuality, this is typically what the living rooms in my life looked like. Just add some super thick plastic on the couch. But one of the things that's important here is that you see this issue of Ebony magazine on the table. And that's the way that Ebony was. Ebony and Jet, they had pride of place in our homes. We consumed the images and the products that they sold. And then also, throughout the years, they changed to fit what our styles were and and what was important to us, right? These tobacco industry brought vital dollars to communities that were marginalized for centuries, and we were so hungry that many of our industries took that money. But the tobacco industry knew what it was doing in terms of pushing its products, because they knew that our entities were starved for support. They also knew that support brought silence. So this quote is a very famous one from the industry. It says, we don't smoke that SHIT, we just sell it. We reserve the right to smoke for the young, the poor, the Black, and the stupid. So that allegedly is a quote from R.J. Reynolds' tobacco company executives. And one of the greatest threats and challenges is that corporations are hell-bent on increasing their products, no matter what the human cost, even though they know how unhealthy these products are. And I know I'm out of time. Just give me like 3 more minutes, Akili. Is that okay? Just 3 more minutes. Okay. Thank you. So also, there's this trend. They pretend to care while they kill us. The Philip Morris printed this article talking about how dedicated they were to the Black community. And they talked about, rather than ignoring the Black consumer in the 1940s, Philip Morris developed a strategy of marketing to all minorities by placing advertisements in Black newspapers and magazines well before most other large corporations did. Now, what they did in this particular letter, if you read the entire document, is they outlined their strategy. They're so stupid, they tell on themselves. So they outlined their entire strategy. And so we can see exactly how they went about targeting our community and our entity. And again, the support bought silence, it bought access, it also bought validity, and it bought trust. And they used our own institutions and often our own community leaders to do it. Also, support for the fine arts, right? The cool jazz festival, something that's very popular. We pretend to care, but while we kill you, but they wrapped it in art. Brown and Williamson pointed out in one of their documents, clearly the sole reason for their interest in Black and in investing in Black and Hispanic communities was the actual potential sale of their products. So they wanted to keep themselves, their names in our spaces and pretend like they really cared about us so that we would trust them. And this is an excerpt from Smoking with the Enemy by our very own Dr. Valerie Yerger. So essentially the conclusion, we can conclude that the point of their participation is to say so that they can pretend to have a good record of contributing to and supporting the Black community. We see that over time, the coon image endures. And this is 1970. The man's wearing a dashiki, but he's doing the pop eyes and the pushed out mouth, saying it gives me a tingle in a very caricaturized way. We also see this image of Jim Crow that we talked about earlier, the minstrel character that the system of segregation is named after, repeated in a 2007 ad for Newports. So they're not slick. And none of these things ends up in an advertisement, by accident. Also, this myth of the Black male hypersexuality and sexual prowess, as well as Black promiscuity. This woman is not looking at his hands on that piano or looking at his cigarette, right? It implies it also that the viewer, when looking at this image, is a part of this sort of hypersexualized space because the cigarettes that they're smoking, the two are missing from this space of the cigarette. So this is how they trick your mind to pull you into these advertisements. Also, they use respected figures like Jackie Robinson, who, by the way, didn't even smoke. You never see a cigarette in his mouth in any of these ads. He's always just holding them or they're next to him, because he didn't smoke. And the story goes that his manager actually made the deal for him to serve as a spokesperson and didn't give him any money. So this sounds like something right out of the book, $40 Million Slaves. Now, this appropriation of cool is something that they used to do, and it's something that they still do. This is a Camel cigarette, and this is a electronic cigarette. It's the same tactic. Also, when you think about mental health, about 7 million people are suffering with mental health in the Black community. This is an estimated number. And there's a significant comorbidity between tobacco use and behavioral health disorders, because a lot of people use tobacco as a stress reducer. We know that the mental health industry is failing everybody, including and especially the Black community here. Which makes these types of ads where supposedly this Black man is resting and relaxing on this park bench smoking a cigarette all the more insidious, because the tobacco industry knows these statistics just like we do. They also co-opted the Black Power movement and created imagery that, co-opted our style of dress. Here you got the Black folks standing on a rug outside, smoking outside the African boutique, smoking cigarettes, etc. But realistically, Newport was one of the most famous brands in no small part to their Alive with Pleasure campaign, which showed us doing everything and just having a good time, playing basketball in our church shoes and, putting Black women on a diet. You're showing them Newport Slims and implying that women are slim, etc. Advertising density so that these advertisements were constantly in our faces. And so that we can never get away from them. And there's always a suggestion of utilizing and accessing these items. And we did not take this sitting down. So there were artivists like Henry Mandrake Brown who painted over these advertisements because he recognized that alcohol and tobacco advertisements were part of the problem, a major part of the problem. And he also came up dead, so this is real. These are real issues, and this is a real powerful industry that we're dealing with. But he painted over these over these advertisements and got rid of more than 700 billboards in the hood in Chicago, as well as Reverend Calvin Butts. So it was tobacco control activists who brought down Uptown cigarettes, which were created specifically to be marketed to Black people. And those were gotten rid of very quickly and kicked off the market, but because people were not having it. Also, artist Hank Willis Thomas created the Fair Warning series, where he removed the images from tobacco as the backgrounds, as well as the cigarettes, and to explore what were actually being sold and told. So you have all these beautiful women in their, two fingers placed in the air in a gesture that almost becomes this hand signal based on our subconscious reckoning or reasoning, hand symbol for Black women's liberation. He also recontextualized tobacco by using it in other artistic installations. So now we have tobacco industry's grandchildren rearing their ugly heads with using the same tactics. This is Young Thug, Rich Homie Quan, and Birdman. And don't be proud of me for knowing those people. I had to text my godchildren to ask who these crazy, funny looking people were. But they're using the same tactics to these flavors, bright colors, the promotions by people that folks trust, particularly young people, even like promoting things like snus in our communities, and utilizing these ideas that, just like in the tobacco ads, in the cigarette ads, in the cigarillo ads, you're having a great time with your friends and smoking. So I'll close by saying the other thing that we're seeing being repeated is the promotion of the idea that people have a right to smoke and a right to vape, et cetera, and that taking away that right or enacting very important public health legislation is akin to government control. So these are all ideas that are being marketed through our press and through our various media outlets. So with that, I will thank you so much for your time. I'm so sorry I went over, and I'm going to turn it over to Baba Akili.
I appreciate that. Listen, the time that you took was good time. So, this has all been good. And I'm honored to be on this panel and to look at the historic process that has gotten us to where we are now. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening now. I want to talk and give you a little background on my struggle and corporate accountabilities struggle around tobacco. In my case, it goes back to, I was on the board of what was at that time, in fact, and we had been fighting Philip Morris for a number of years. We targeted Kraft, if I remember correctly, because Philip Morris owned Kraft, and they were, using that Kraft brand to make themselves seem more acceptable. And one of the things two things that I remember. First, that they tried to discredit what was at that time Impact by saying that we were against people's individual right to smoke. But it's one thing to say that and then try to paint Impact as we differ with them. But they put people in our organization that spied on us, that tried to develop distrust and stuff within the organization. Because this is, big tobacco will use every measure at its disposal to promote their profits. And if it kills people, well, that's just too bad. We just get some more. So part of what is happening today is that big tobacco has found, much like they did in what you see presented here today, they've always found a way to connect themselves to interests of Black folks and to say, well, we support you. I'm in the leadership of Black Lives Matters Los Angeles, and I'm on the chair. I'm on the board of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. And one of the things that the Philip Morris in particular, but big tobacco overall, because they're fighting, the bans on menthols. Brother Philip talked about the big tobacco put an initiative on the ballot here. I'm in LA to overturn the state's ban on menthols. And the approach that they were using was civil rights. It's your civil right to be able to smoke if you want. And any group or the state, if it infringes on it, is like Jim Crow. And they literally made that argument, and I'm making it now. They are suggesting that you have a right to slowly kill yourself, and they got a right to the profits to do that. And it's a civil rights issue. They are also making the argument, and for many of us in Black Lives Matter, they're making the argument and attaching themselves to Eric Gardner by suggesting, well, no, they're not suggesting, they're saying that if you ban menthols and the police are involved in in enforcing that law or that ban, then you could wind up with an Eric Gardner. And because of the work that has been done and the distrust now, with policing and the reservations that many people in the Black community have. So when you imply that there's going to be interaction with the police and Black people could wind up being killed, then it triggers in us like, oh, well, I don't want that. And that's what the big tobacco is doing now. What you see in front of you, and this is the continuation of what Sterling and Tracy and Philip have been talking about in terms of the insidiousness of the tobacco industry. They will do whatever they can to try to connect to and seem reasonable in terms to promote, in ways to promote their project. What you see here is the Philip Morris statement on criminal justice. It came because they wanted to meet with the Institute of the Black World 21st Century to share, and you can see at the bottom it says Altria, to share their position on criminal justice. Now, part of this exists because the world has cracked open because of the murder of George Floyd in May 25th last year by the police, and they wanted to try to lay out their support for criminal justice. Now, this isn't being proposed in Congress. This isn't being proposed in state legislatures around the world, or even at the local level. But they took this position in an effort to connect with people who have Black interests and working on Black issues. But this is simply, at best, a statement. It's not a policy position. It's not something that they're trying to advance. It's not even something that they lift up and say that we're going to fight with you to make it real. It's simply a statement. What they are trying to do is imply that they stand with us. Now, the contradiction is that on the one hand, they say they want to stand with us. On the other hand, 45,000 Black people are going to die because of their product. That's the contradiction. That's the problem. That's the kind of manipulation that they want. This is something else that they shared with us at the Institute of the Black World when they met, and they list all of the things that all of the ways over the years that they've been invested in diversity. Can you scroll up just a little bit? Going back a little bit more, going back to 1933. And I think in there they talked about the fact that they hired, they were the first to hire Black salespeople. Now, that's to promote their product. So it ain't like they were supporting ending Jim Crow or expanding or eliminating the separate but equal system that existed at the time, they simply were trying to sell their cigarettes to Black people. So the fact that they brought on Black salesperson is not significant, but they go from 1933 through to where they are now. And Sterling, I hope y'all get a copy of this, because what that does is this is in direct contradiction to all of the information that Sterling and Tracy laid out. So here you have an industry that's willing to promote its product, which is extremely harmful. It's a slow death product. And they're willing to appropriate, identify with, and advance the at least the imagery of Black folks in an effort to do it. And what Philip Morris is doing is going around meeting with Black organizations, expressing their support for criminal justice, and trying to say that they've been about diversity and inclusion since, for 3 or 4 or 5 decades. But it is once again in an effort to sell their product, buy good relationships, and advance their public relation image. And part of what today is focused on, the going up in smoke, is that they are willing, Big Tobacco, has been willing to do whatever they can to, if necessary, lie. That's just it. They will lie. They will misinform and they will misdirect so that you will buy their product. And part of what I think we have to do, and these presentations today have been just, if the word that keeps coming to my mind is just unbelievably dope. I mean, they have just been very good at explaining first the historic nature of the tobacco industry, and then what I saw what Philip did was the historic information, but the impact of it, the death that results from it. And so I want to talk about the 4 conditions that Black folks face, and then connect that to, very quickly, the tobacco industry: white supremacy, institutional racism, individual bigotry, and mass denial. And if you listen today, the tobacco industry will say, well, we're not racist. They will say, even though their history is laced with their racist, not only belief, attitudes, and impositions, but they will deny it. The individual bigotry, those ads that you saw reinforces that individual bigotry. And then you have institutions that reinforce the white supremacy that is rampant in America today. And so part of what the tobacco industry has done and is doing is connecting to and trying to promote their product based upon those 4 conditions. We see, you've seen it here. In a year from now, we are going to hear the tobacco industry in California, which already spent $12 million. They're going to spend anywhere from $50 to $100 million to defeat the menthol ban. And they're going to use the message of civil rights, that it is your civil right to be able to, if you want to vape, if you want to smoke menthol cigarettes, you ought to have that right. That will resonate with Black people because our civil rights and human rights have been denied to us. And so when you come to us and say somebody is trying to infringe on or take your civil rights, we will stop and then push back against it. And they will likely be successful because what they will do is get Black faces to carry their message in our community. And they got enough money to buy some Black faces to make that argument on a statewide basis that our civil rights are being attacked because we're not allowed to smoke menthol cigarettes. The other part of the message will be that if you ban menthols and the police have to enforce the ban, Black people could wind up dead, because that has been the pattern history in America. When police are involved with Black folks, we wind up being dead. I mean, look at George Floyd and the rest of the murders that have happened throughout US history. So civil rights and don't let police be involved. One of the struggles I and others have had in trying to push back against some of that is, first of all, the ban is a commercial ban. It's not an individual. So if I'm a person that buys menthol, that's the police have no role in enforcing the ban if I buy it. The enforcement side is the seller side, but they are manipulative enough to be able to make the argument that if you get caught with menthol cigarettes, you could wind up like Phillip Gardiner. Those two factors are what has been driving the pushback and supporting the tobacco industry's effort at maintaining their profit, particularly in our community. And so much of what you see today, much of what we have struggling against today is a continuation of and connected to this history that has been laid out for us in very convincing, compelling, and I think ways that should move us to, first, if it's tobacco industry is related to it, don't believe it. Secondly, don't accept it. And thirdly, push back against it. Don't believe it, don't accept it, and push back against it. Those are the three things that certainly I and others are going to be involved in an effort to reduce, eliminate, and finally end the predatory practices of big tobacco in our community. And I say predatory because look at the history that has been promoted here, that has been shared with us. And the presenters did a masterful job, I think, of sharing that information. As a matter of fact, we need to be able to do this every hour on the hour in our community to help us see, understand, and accept what's being done by big tobacco in order to trick us, well, lie to us, trick us, and then get us to accept their product. So let me stop there. Because I want to leave a lot of room for discussion and question and answers. But more importantly, I want to thank Phillip, Sterling, Tracy for laying out compelling information, arguments, and positions that should help us when we talk to our sisters and brothers, when we engage them, when we have to try to overcome the cultural understanding that we have that the tobacco industry is not our friend. The tobacco industry is not doing anything good in our community ever. And the tobacco industry is in fact a dangerous industry, a predatory industry, an industry that we need to make sure we keep an eye on and keep out of our community. So once again, I want to uplift Tracy, Sterling, and Phillip for your work, for your information, but more importantly, for the weapons is not always a good term. I don't like that term, but the what you've given us to be able to stand in our community to push back against this predatory industry. So thank you all so much. And this has been y'all's presentations was just genuinely dope. I mean, just I'm hanging. I'm sorry I was late. I was in the wrong. I was in the audience thing, and I'm listening. I'm thinking, damn. And then I got to miss some of this. So I'm finally glad to be back in. You all did a magnificent, masterful job, and I'm thinking to myself, damn, how can I get them to some places I'm working with so they can make them presentations? And one of the things I want to invite y'all to do is come to, because Philip Morris came in and made a presentation, y'all to the Institute of the Black World, I'm going to see if I can get the chair to invite you all in to make a presentation on behalf of Black folks about what's really happening with this industry. So, and I'm looking for other ways I can invite you all in to share this information, but not, the information is powerful, but it's what we do with this information that's even more powerful. So anyway, I want to thank y'all, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you to try to promote this information and to try to promote the actions that we need to be involved in to stop this predatory industry. So thank you.
Thank you, Akili.
By the way, got my orange on today because I'm supporting the gun violence, ending gun violence in America. So thank you.
There we go, Akili. Hopefully everyone stays with us for our closing. Before we close, just to note, we'll take some moments to get up on the Q&A. But before we do all that, I just want to say a big thank you to Akili, to Dr. Phillip Gardiner, to Sterling Fulton and Tracy Brown for these presentations, because I think I have some reflections that I'm just going to share here. We're going to jump into Q&A, and hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion to close this out. We'll make sure the recordings go out for everyone, and I'll make sure to share a lot of the content that Akili got from the Institute of the Black World's presentation from Altria, so that people have that information, because it is insidious, it is gross. So here are my reflections. Number one, I think if you haven't taken away anything, it's that forgetting history is a threat to achieving justice. The importance of the history and the legacy of the tobacco industry is not just about what we think is important. It is critical towards the tobacco industry's current transformation efforts. They are trying to rebrand themselves into the future, into a new generation with new products. If we allow the forgetting of the tobacco industry's legacy and impacts, we are allowing the tobacco industry to win yet again with another generation of addicted people. Another thing that I'm taking away, this is probably really specific, and Sterling's going to be like, this is what you took away from my presentation, but a common misconception is that in the African continent, the places where tobacco is grown are the only type of plant that can be grown there. This is something that's said in Zambia and Tanzania. This is something I've heard from advocates, is that the industry tells governments that tobacco is the only thing that can grow there. If it's part of the nightshade family, why are we not using the land that we are on, not just for commodity, but for the things that can feed our people, feed our communities, and feed the world? So push back against this terrible, non-scientific mention of agriculture wherever you see it. And it's really important, because what has come up is tobacco growing in the South has always been this part of, this is the only way we can go. And that's not true. If we learn anything from Fannie Lou Hamer and Akili's continued teachings about Fannie Lou Hamer's history, is that we must be able to feed ourselves to liberate ourselves. Lastly, action. We didn't put this on for y'all to just drone out, hear a bunch of words, and then go back to your day. We did it because there's action behind this. We are in a moment where we need decision makers to support the bans on menthol, to be focused on the industry and the manufacturers and their role in perpetuating the tobacco epidemic, and make sure that when we're thinking about the consumers, they are actually people that are addicted to a product. So any action against the tobacco epidemic should be an action about the tobacco manufacturers. Second, make sure to support the California ban. If you're in California, if you're a decision maker, if you're a person in the everyday, support the menthol ban. It is a big win and can set a trend for other people, other communities, other states to move forward faster than the FDA has shown us that they can. And lastly, I think the thing that I want to mention is that for folks in the media or folks that work with media, make sure that the media talks about the impacts, not the industry's PR and spin cycle. We've seen multiple articles that are paid for by the industry. We've seen many spotlights of PMI and Washington Post and New York Times talking about the smoke-free future. And I am sorry, there is no future where the tobacco industry is involved. Let's leave tobacco industry in the past, like we did with asbestos, like we want to do with lead, and tobacco is next up on the list. And then lastly, we have to stop the exploitation of this racist legacy, the extraction, the slave labor, and the continued starvation wages that are exported into the global South. Our ability to have Pan-African liberation and the ability to push back against how the tobacco industry is doing this in our communities here in the US and is doing it in Africa is one of a revolutionary spirit. And the only reason that the tobacco industry continues to make profits is because they've been able to rebrand here in the US and export their tactics into the global South. And so I'm really excited to continue supporting the efforts from Sterling and Tracy and Phillip and also Akili as we push back against this extraction from the Black community and the division and conquering that's going on. And I use that very specifically. British American tobacco, imperial brands, if you look at the logos of Philip Morris International, they are lasting legacies of white supremacy and imperialism. And it is not, it's not something that should be lost on any of us. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I'm going to see if anyone has any answer to the Q&A question that's in here for passing policy at the local level, if there's enforcement agencies besides the police department and codes. Dr. Gardiner, did you want to start off, and then I'll open it up for any other?
Well, so let me just give a shout out to my co-presenters. These were fabulous presentations, and as the chat has shown, that people are telling it like it is. I liked your last comment, Michél, that these logos of the tobacco industries are logos of 500 years of white supremacy and the domination and killing of Black people, straight up, with a period after it. So I want to thank you there. Secondly, the question in the chat about the enforcement, and I just want to back up on Akili's point. The laws that are being passed in California and around the country at the local level are about the retailer not being able to sell the product. It's not about an individual's ability to buy, possess, or use the product. The police have no say in what that is done. Now, what is true, to get more into granular about it, there are other groups in our society or in cities at the local level that can do some level of enforcement other than police, and they don't have to be about arresting people. I mean, just think about the thing with George Floyd. They sent 6 police officers heavily armed for a person who passed a $20 bad check or bad bill. I mean, that's irresponsible. That's another issue that we have to deal with. But more specifically, public health departments have people that can help in these projects. At school level, there's also teachers and PTA associations that can help in terms of these levels. And the last thing I want to say, because that's what I wanted the question to really ask, what do we do at the local level and at the state level? I really want to go back, and I appreciate Michael's pointing out this is really an action, and the stuff that Sterling and Tracy and Akili brought to you is to be used to change the world. We cannot wait on the FDA to pass a law. We've been waiting 12 years and not a damn thing has happened. So I want to really encourage at the local level that begin to work with our local partners, the local NAACPs, the local national medical associations, the local AMAs. There's 100 Black men, 100 Black women. All of these groups at the local level are going to be very helpful in what we try and do and should be involved in that. And so I just want to thank folks for doing that and talking about that.
And let me just say right here in Los Angeles, we are passing a menthol ban. And the person who's doing it, a Black city council member, specifically wrote in the language, no role for law enforcement. Now, Marquise put that in there. Still, the tobacco industry is promoting the fact that, well, yes, but. And just recently, we had 2 Sundays ago, we had no menthol Sundays, where pastors from throughout the city agreed that they would in their presentations, I'm going to say their sermons, because they don't want, they kind of push back on that being a part of their sermon, but in their discussions, their openings, but not their sermon, that they would make sure that they raise the issue of what menthol is doing and what cigarettes are doing to our community. So those are just some of the local things that are happening. But we are getting considerable. This is a struggle because the tobacco industry has spread around some money, and there are people who I know and work with all the time who are with me on BLM stuff, but it's like, yeah, but what about this this menthol thing? Won't that hurt Black people and all the rest of that? That's because the tobacco industry is still using the approaches that Sterling and Tracy have talked about. I was a field director for the NAACP, and the NAACP used to give millions of dollars the tobacco industry used to give millions of dollars. I remember going to the office and seeing almost a whole wing that was paid for by the tobacco industry. Now they've ultimately gotten away from that in some places, but there are some local things locally that can be done, like these resolutions supporting the ban. Now, in our case, it's more than a resolution, it's actual legislation. But resolutions are helpful. These No Sunday menthols, explaining about the impact of menthol cigarettes and flavored cigarettes, having those presentations at churches are ways of educating our people to the predatory practices of the tobacco industry. So if you need help with that, you can contact us at Corporate Accountability. We can work with you to try and put you in touch with people who are doing this on a local level.
I'd also like to submit that as we're sort of revisiting a lot of history and we're talking about the multi-generational nature of white supremacy and white supremacist ideology, how pervasive it is in our society, it's important that we call things out and call them what they are. So when we talk about plantations in the South where people are getting married and having vacations, etc., we have to recognize those as sites of terror. And Southern planters were kidnappers, rapists, terrorists, reprobates, perverts, horrible people. We get to say that because that is the truth of who they are. And that's part of the tobacco industry legacy. When we have people who take and manipulate the pain that we feel at the loss of our loved ones, the loss of Eric Garner, the violent loss of Trayvon Martin, the violent loss of George Floyd. Those things are very painful for us as people because we watch when we saw them on screen being brutalized. Not only did we see the total disrespect of their humanity, but we saw our fathers and our brothers and our uncles and our cousins and our lovers and our friends being murdered without a care. And we see it happening over and over and over. So the people who come and they utilize that pain and they access that pain to manipulate us into making legislative decisions that are counter to what is healthy and what is right for us. They utilize the death of our martyrs to manipulate us. We have to call them what they are. You don't get to continue to be a good person in my eyes when you come at me with that. If you come into the community and you are pushing that line and you know good and doggone well that no tobacco or no cigarette ever killed a Black person, and it's also, they also were not killed because they were Black. They were killed because the racist ideology that was held by the people who murdered them in cold blood in the streets. We have to call it what it is. Our Blackness is not a problem, and tobacco control is not the problem. The problem is racist ideology and white supremacy, and we have to say that like it is, and we have to call out the people who are coming into our communities and promoting these erroneous ideas in an effort to manipulate us.
Tracy, I don't have words to say after that. But what I do want to do is I want to point people. I put some links in the chat, and I want to point you to the Center for Black Health and Equity. I want to point you to our website where we have lots of resources, and we have the No Menthol Sunday. That's our Sunday. That's our event the center's event. So I want to point you to our website where we've got tons of information on understanding equitable enforcement, understanding the menthol issue, and also not just menthol, but also other issues that are very important and germane to Black health. I want to point out all of this is because of, it's interesting that white supremacy, that racism, what's underneath it is greed. And when it boils down to it, it's all about that, the unfairness of one industry who is usurping and co-opting not just the lives but also the economic power of people, and it really is just insidious. So but again, to find more information, I just want to point you over to the center's website, and to the Center for Black Health and Equity, to our website.
Oh, Akili, you're on mute.
Yes, I want to bring up and add the term predatory. This industry is predatory.
Yes.
This ain't a coincidence. This is not like, oh, wow, look at what they develop these practices. They use them here. One of our sister organizations on the continent, COPPA, is fighting back against these predatory practices. And I think we need to use that in terms when we talk about big tobacco. They are a predatory industry. They're not, like, well, we just happen to have a product here that people want. No, they are pushing that product. They identify. I mean, look at what y'all laid out on how they approached us. You know what I mean? Even today, the notion of, if you look up cool in the dictionary, you're going to see Black people. You know what I mean? And they were able to appropriate that to promote their product. That's predatory thinking. That's predatory behavior. That's predatory action. And we need to call them what they are, predators.
Ooh. All right. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to shake it out. But yeah, I think unless there's any other questions, I think I'm just going to close here. I'm going to give a last round of like final words to the panelists. Maybe like what's one thing that you're holding that we've got to do in the next 6 months, and then I'll give like a final closing. So maybe Akili, if you want to give like a one sentence what we got to do in the next 6 months, and then pass it on.
We got to keep fighting, because when we fight, we win. And I appreciate the organizations that are doing this work on the ground. So when we fight, we win. We got to keep fighting.
Dr. Phillip.
It's hard to put it in a sentence, but Amílcar Cabral, one of the leaders of the Guinea-Bissau revolutionary movement against Portuguese colonialism, put it this way. He said, claim no easy victories, tell no lies. Punchline is, this is a long fight. 6 months is just a stepping stone. This is not a dash, this is a marathon. Let's just keep that in mind, and let's keep the fight up. And thanks for bringing up predatory. Usually in my presentations, I spend a good 10 slides on predatory. Enough said.
Well, I'll go next. Within the next 6 months, in addition to learning, taking a minute and learning how to advocate, learning how to work within your communities to get menthol policies passed. I can't stress that enough. But also going back to our youth, and getting our youth to understand that they came from kings and queens, and to really, build up their self-esteem, to understand that in Africa, You know, we are the cradle of civilization. Universities were started in Africa. In Africa, we have examples of wonderful architecture and wonderful metallurgy and all types of things within civilization. So just getting youth to understand that so that they can build up their self-esteem and build up who they are as they go and they fight these fights.
I definitely want to echo what Sterling said about advocacy and making sure that we're all acting locally, doing what we can, not only for tobacco control, but for ensuring that we maintain our voting rights, because we know that they are absolutely under attack. And we want to make sure that we don't allow those attacks on our voting rights to prevent us and our people from enacting legislation and voting in community leaders who are going to also be on our side. And I also ask the tobacco control specialists who are on this call to expand the conversation from just protect our kids, protect our kids, protect our kids, to protect people from vulnerable populations, people of all ages from vulnerable populations. You know, we talk about industry targeting, and the industry targets all of us, not just kids, and over 21 exemptions are not acceptable in the fight to, you know, keep our community safe. So just staying focused.
Thank you all so much. I don't have anything else to add to that. I think that was a beautiful summation, and I think that we can reflect on what Dr. Phillip Gardiner just reminded us of, which is take no easy wins, or what is it? Can you say it one more time, Dr. Gardiner?
Claim no easy victories and tell no lies.
Tell no lies and claim no easy victories. I'm a cabral.
I love it. That's what we'll close with. Thank you all to all the panelists, and thank you to all the attendees. We'll make sure to send out the recording. And this has been I don't know. I was gonna make a joke there, but we're still recording. So this has been an awesome webinar, is what it's been. Thank you all.
Thank you. You all were great.
Thank you so much. Great. Thank you.